Yes.
I'm concerned about two things when you talk about how Congress works. One is the current understanding I have about the filibuster and the fact that you don't have to be there and do anything, it seems. And secondly, the supermajority votes. What are your views on that? Because it seems to me that that really hinders a lot of action.
Well, I agree with you. There's three areas of, actually 4 areas of change. The first is just behavior. You just gotta not be afraid. In my case, Harry Reid, and in the Republican case, Mitch McConnell. You just have to say, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it regardless of what threats you put on the table. So, but in actual concrete change, the first is changing the Budget Act, changing the number of committees. I mean, the 9/11 Commission made a set of very specific recommendations. The poster child for me is that there are 88 subcommittees today with oversight responsibility for the Department of Homeland Security. And other than we spend too much and get less security than we ought, it's working just fine. And there's other areas, and Congress is spending too much money on itself, considerably. And I don't think you can get our budget balanced unless Congress is willing to lead. So specifically, Congress has got to cut its pensions back. They're way too generous. And particularly, as I said, particularly at a time where we're saying we're going to have shared sacrifice, we have to share in that sacrifice, it won't get done. The second is what I referenced earlier, a constitutional amendment that has 4 elements, and the third is what you're talking about, which is the filibuster. And there's a number of things that I'll support. One is when you reference, you should not be able to filibuster unless you're willing to stay on the floor and talk so long as your bladder holds out. You should not be able to put a secret hold on a nominee beyond 3 or 4 days until they get back. You should be required to present 40 people in support of the filibuster at the moment you begin, rather than making everybody else come up with a supermajority of 60 in order to end it. You shouldn't have a situation where once a nominee comes out of committee, they get tied up forever. There should be some reasonable period of time, 30 days, 60 days for an up or down vote. That's why we have presidential elections, in my opinion. And say lastly, it's a little more arcane. We got to change the vetting process for nominees to the executive branch, because right now, each Senate office gets access to all this personal information about people. And I think we're going to get a deteriorating quality of people willing to do it unless until you create some kind of confidential process where the determination can be made as to whether or not there's a real conflict. And the fact that 30 years ago you had somebody doing lawn work for you who wasn't documented should hardly disqualify you from being the Undersecretary of the Army or some such thing. But right now it does. So almost any trivial thing can be blown way out of proportion. And I think Congress needs to make some changes. And to my mind, it's connected to the filibuster and the holds and the refusal to vote. Basically politicizing every single nominee that comes our way if there's some political benefit in doing so.
Supermajority?
The supermajority is the 60 vote. I think that's what you were referencing, the 60. I mean, the change. I would not change so you go back to a majority, although I'm tempted to. It would be better than what we have right now. If you can't get the rule change so that you're required to present 40 signatures for the filibuster, if you can't get that rule changed, then I'd go to supermajority. I'd go back to, I'd eliminate supermajority and go back to majority rule. I mean, it works in the House. Yes?
It's kind of a Senate's role in debating or not debating foreign military interventions.
Well, yes. Trying to see if I can lengthen this cord. Yes. Article 1 of the Constitution explicitly gives Congress the authority to declare war, not the President, who's in Article 2 of the Constitution. So Congress has that authority, not the President. So specifically, I think that President Obama should have come to Congress for a war powers resolution for Libya. U.S. lives were those pilots would not take the argument that our lives were at stake. And I think we needed to get an explicit authorization, personally, for Iraq. We carried Iraq out under a war powers resolution that was passed immediately after 9/11. In my own personal experience, I fought a war that was popular at the beginning and unpopular at the end. And among the things that I'm strongly of the view is that even if in a congressional debate, if the constitutional requirements are met, that is to say, the Congress debating whether to go to war, not watching the president go off to war and us wondering what the heck is going on, which I think is unconstitutional. When we're debating it, I would say, I want to know what it's going to cost, both for the actual execution of the war itself, as well as taking care of these kids when they come back. It's got a 50-year tail on it. So tell me what the price tag is, and if the American people aren't willing to pay for it, I'm voting no. Because what we've done in the past 11 years, we've been borrowing money from the Chinese and other people to fight these darn wars, and it weakens us. It doesn't strengthen us, it weakens us. So, because one more little moment. 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a poll, I think it was the Omaha World Herald, said 75% of Nebraskans want to get out of Afghanistan as quickly as possible. Now, I didn't agree with that in this case, but it also said 75% of Nebraskans want to go to war with Iran, with which I strongly disagree. And the reason that occurs is that, they get nuclear weapons, and without asking the question, well, then what? 80 million people in Iran, if they could Iraq is a mess. Iran will be even messier and much more expensive. So in the moment when the debate is occurring, if the answer is American people aren't willing to pay for it, I'm going to vote no. Because if we have to borrow the money to do it, another way of saying it, and it's important, because we have all these treaties out there that commits us if somebody else is attacked. So we have a treaty with Taiwan. The terms and conditions of which that if China invades Taiwan, we got to go to war with China. The problem is at the moment, we got to borrow the money from the Chinese in order to do it. So I'm very strongly of the view that Congress and Congress alone can decide when this country is going to go to war, and very strongly of the view that we need to face the true cost, unless it's a clear and present existential danger as there was after Pearl Harbor. Most of the time there's not. So we get all excited about doing something, and then we look at we end up a sticker shock. We shouldn't do it because it's an all-volunteer force now. We don't have 535 members of Congress, all of them got some kid that's being drafted. It's a diminishing number that's skin in the game. So I would be up front and say, here's what it's going to cost, and if American people aren't willing to pay the price, then I don't think we should do it. Yes, sir.
You mentioned at the 9/11 Commission about improvements in security. What about the aspect of it that it has to do with privacy, individual privacy, that's going to be as a result of that?
Well, as I'm sure you know, we've been dealing with this freedom versus security issue since the founding of the Republic, since John Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Act in his single term as president. And there are moments when we get afraid and we trample on individual liberty. I think we did actually after 9/11. I'm sympathetic because we were looking at potential anthrax attacks and all kinds of things that were connected to the recent event when something was unimaginable happened. And once something unimaginable happens, you start to imagine other unimaginable things that can happen. So, I'm personally a strong advocate of protecting the individual citizen against the government. Whether it's because the government's got a huge amount of power when it exercises its police powers, a tremendous amount of power. And they can ruin you, even if you're innocent, they can ruin you. So you really have to be careful in those moments when we're frightened. Now, I think, at the moment, I think we rebalance relatively well. And my largest concern today is not with the government, it's much more with privacy issue having to do with private companies. And much more concerned about external cyber attacks that occur as a consequence of systems vulnerability that we have.
Well, one of the things that I see that it happens locally, we see in the papers, is that after, and I'm not saying it should be vigilant, but things roll downhill. And you never saw in my lifetime up until recently with somebody locally who infraction of the law, and they deserve to be arrested and perhaps punished. But why should they, have a charge tacked on of terrorist activities?
No, it's,
And that I see as an outgrowth of that, and whatever those policies are that you deem necessary or not, there should have built in a scale back possibility.
yeah,
And
I don't disagree. Where you really find that is that the best example of that is probably on the no-fly list. But I've experienced it with people who told me, I went to fly somewhere recently, and I couldn't fly because I'm on the no-fly list, and you don't know why you're on the no-fly list, and you can't find out why you're not on the no-fly list other than you can't fly. And it's likely to be because you've got a name that's similar to or identical to somebody else that actually ought to be on the no-fly list. So there's a need for oversight in these areas, and it's again way far down in the weeds, I think, but oversight responsibility of Congress oftentimes get undervalued in the political debate because you don't think of it, but it's probably among the most important things that Congress does. Oversight of executive branch agencies. And in those executive branch agencies where the public has a right to know what's going on, let's take the Department of Agriculture, what you get is the press and the public now, thanks to the internet, examining what's going on because it's not classified. But in that $80 billion black world of intelligence, and I believe in good intelligence, I believe there's times when secrecy is absolutely essential. I mean, for example, I think that the President was wrong to have a press conference detailing what SEAL Team 6 did in Abbottabad, because they gave up something. This Pakistani doctor is serving 33 years in prison. There are times when you have to be very, very careful, but there are times when secrecy does not equal security. It can increase insecurity. And that's what happened in the run-up to 9/11. And that oversight responsibility is difficult. And among the recommendations that we made that weren't enacted was to strengthen those committees. I don't think you should be on any other committee. If you're on the committee that has oversight responsibility for $80 billion of highly classified stuff, because the work is harder. It's at least 10 times harder because you don't have the free press examining. Are you spending enough? Are you spending too little? Are you spending it right? Are you doing things that you shouldn't be doing, et cetera, et cetera? The whole discussion right now in Benghazi, there's a lot of it we just don't know because now it appears that the CIA was in the lead by providing security for our consulate there. So the committees have a burden of responsibility greater than a committee with the responsibility for overseeing an open agency, and a lot of it has to do with personal liberties because oftentimes you just don't know unless you're read into the program.